think, he brought up the Myers-Briggs test, Comer did, and that was another, like I've done a lot of like kind of career development training in my past for young people.
Hmm.
And these tests are helpful to a degree, but I became like in my journey with that stuff, I became extremely disillusioned with it
Yeah.
because again, there's a telos, right? There's something that you're drawing somebody towards. And once you kind of like scooch them into that lane, it's like there's nowhere else for them to go. And so like I find like I sit around and talk to people about the Enneagram. I was just having a conversation with folks at my church about this the other day. They wanted to talk to me about my opinion on the Enneagram. And I said, well, I feel about the same way about that as I do about astrology and tarot cards. And they thought I was being like derogatory. And I'm like, I'm not being derogatory. I'm just saying that like people have been practicing these things for a long time. Like they've thought this kind of stuff. But the risk is there's a spirit in those things
Yeah.
and it's drawing you to something. What I don't like is when people they use these ways of self-realization as though like there's this kind of like Rousseauian naivete to it, right? Where they're like, there's a natural you somewhere, and you just need to get all the accumulation of society off of you. And then you'll find who your true self is. And these
Right.
tests will help you do that. But but that's so naive because these things are part of society that's trying to shape you from the outside, right? But if you just fall in one lane, it's like you become stunted. It's part of why I think there's so much mental illness in the age of the nuclear family in suburbia, right? It's like your village used to shape your character, right? It was a given. It was taken for granted that community was a good and that you actually like your identity was shaped and formed by the external environment that you were in, right? And so now that we think we've lied to ourselves and said it's all about my individual spiritual journey with God, it's like no, you're being taken somewhere by somebody, and you use the language several years ago. You started using the language of colonization
Yeah.
for what YouTubers were doing to people,
Yeah.
like they're colonizing your minds, your hearts, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of uncritically like if you're just doing that stuff, it's like, oh, these are psychologists, they know what they're doing. These are helpful tests. It's like, no, it's these things are shaping you, and so that's my hesitation. I'm not trying to be like it's why the church began to talk about astrology and tarot cards as if they're like demonic. It's because they understood the power of that spirit. Like that can be the guiding force in your life. And once you start, like, once your day becomes about you thinking to yourself, well, I'm not going to do that because I'm an 8, right? Oh, and that person, they're a 7. So I'm not going to even try to interact with that person because I'm at this number and we're going to clash. It's like you become possessed by that thing, right? And you're being shaped by it into something new that you weren't before, right? It's not like it's just helping you develop more of you. It's like, no, it's actually replacing you and making you something else.
Yeah. I've never gotten into the Enneagram. And again, I don't know anything about it. I'm not trying to,
No,
you know,
totally.
do anything with it. But once you sort of take on the identity of that number,
Yeah.
it was sort of like I was, around for the whole Myers-Briggs thing, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago. I remember my parents getting that book and we're all filling out the little sheets and who are you? I'm an INTJ, I'm an ENTJ. And the thing is that once you read that little description in that book,
Yeah.
now you're sort of looking in this mirror and that mirror is looking back at you. And now I'm seeing myself through these 4 little letters. And now when something comes, I ask myself, and there's a little bit of question about what's my next move with this. Well, I'm an ENTJ, therefore my move is this and not that. And it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of mind control, a little bit of possession that
Yeah.
this Myers-Briggs spirit has put into me, and it's starting to lead me towards this thing. And of course, when you get to a village, well, now suddenly on one hand, there's a little bit more security because at least you have a degree of temperamental diversity that's probably in that village. But you've also at the same time got some larger spirits that, of course, are shaping that whole village. There's no getting away from the mind control and from the possession. We are going to be possessed by spirits, and the only questions are which spirits and where are they taking us?
Yes, and I think that's exactly right. And I think I run into a lot of like people who are like, they come from like these non-denom mega church backgrounds, and they don't believe that there's any they think that there's spirits and then there's God. And then, I'm like, I always, Michael Heiser, I always want to get him to read Michael Heiser a little bit, just to kind of like, parse that out a little bit. There's more going on there. But yeah, I think that you're right. I think it would be ignorant to say that, yeah, we're a sea of spirits impacting, drawing us here back and forth. It's like, I think the ancient Greeks, the way that they would talk about these things, daemons, and it was like, it seems as though there's a lot of overlap between what we call emotions and what they call daemons. And it's like, and we even use, there's like these kind of anachronisms where it's like we say, oh, he was possessed with anger, possessed with lust, right? It's like these things enter in and they totally reorient your perception of the world. And they're like, you have agency still, but those things are taking you somewhere,
Right.
right? And when I say possession, it's like, yeah, it's like that internal thing that's taking you somewhere. It's
Yes.
why, I'd say people can get possessed by nationalism,
Yes.
right? It's this, you're like on the healthy end of this, healthy, I just used that, right? On the
Sure.
good end of the spectrum, right? It's like there is a kind of like love for neighbor that's getting expressed with like patriotism and all that kind of thing. But when we say nationalism, a lot of times what we mean is there's this added layer of like control that the spirit of the thing has grabbed you. It's no longer you're caring about people. You are now like you're caring about the spirit, America, the American spirit. It's like we got to hold on to that, right? And yeah, so but we're a sea of those things. I think with the Christian, it seems to me, and correct me if you think I'm off on this, but it seems to me the Christian distinction has always been that when we say that Jesus is Lord, the the assertion is not that nothing else exists, but that he has dominion over it all.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's all answerable to him,
Right.
right? There's not these other things where it's like, you drive around some areas in the country and you see the American flag and then the Christian flag beneath it. It's like that's the inversion of how proper ordering, right? If we think about the hierarchy of, influence or whatever. But yeah, and so as I look at the modern spiritual formation movement, again, like I'm kind of peripherally connected to it because I'm serving in ministry with folks who are very much engaged in it. But it seems like it seems like we're kind of playing out this this therapeutic, like therapy seems to be replacing a robust a robust, how to say it, like the narrative of Christianity seems to be getting kind of like, it's like the body snatchers a little bit is what it
Mm.
feels like. It feels like, or I don't know if you watch any like analog horror or anything like that. There's a really interesting one, really disturbing. It's a form of narrative on YouTube. It's called Gemini Home Entertainment. And there is like the narrative that unfolds is like there's this alien presence from the outside that has infected the planet, the Earth, and it's like it gets itself inside of things and starts replacing it. And it's like replacing it from the inside out. And the invasion is from the inside out. And there seems to be there's something kind of powerful about that to me because I think that's actually kind of how invasion kind of happens in terms of like replacement happens. And it feels like as we start shifting out, we start replacing our terms and our like kind of teleological frameworks for like the purpose of the Christian life. It's like it does feel like the thing is becoming something else. It's like
Hmm.
Harold Bloom described it as the American religion. It's not Christian in the historic sense of the word. It's become a different kind of religion that's more in line with what classic Gnosticism. And anyway, as a pastor, I'm probably too overly neurotic, in reference to my thinking about this stuff. But yeah, John Mark Comer provoked that in me to where it's like, again, like I see that tendency in my own ministry and
Hmm.
in the ministry of those around me, where I'm like kind of like selectively replacing components of this thing that I think historic Christianity, like I don't think it would have made sense to Paul the way that we talk about. Paul wouldn't have recognized a lot of what we're talking about here, it feels like, in Christianity.